I've been milling my grains and baking bread for well over a decade, and here I am on YouTube teaching all about it, but I still receive comments of people not wanting to even try my recipes or anything because I do not weigh my ingredients. Well, there's a reason that I do not obsess about weighing my ingredients whenever I'm baking bread. And I'm going to be sharing with y'all why that is today. We're also going to be doing a science experiment today to actually show y'all kind of why weighing isn't as exact as you may think when it comes to using 100% fresh milled grains. The results may actually surprise you and actually show you why your bread may not be turning out quite right. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, I teach you all about real whole grains from a biblical perspective. I teach you how to be milling your own grains, baking that delicious bread, and more. Okay, so as I stated, we're gonna be tackling a topic that I have talked about here before on YouTube, but it's been a while and we need to address it again. And that is why I actually do not weigh my grains. I actually recently came out with my very first cookbook. You can find on Amazon and the description box below. And I've actually had a few comments from people saying they were not gonna buy my cookbook or even look at my recipes because I use cups instead of grams because I don't actually weigh my ingredients. And as I stated before, there's a reason why I do not do this. And we're gonna be discussing that. Plus, we're gonna be doing a science experiment to actually show that I know what I'm talking about. So, let's get started. Okay, so I'm here set up pretty much for our science experiment, but before we get started on the experiment, I need to explain to you the why. Now, the biggest reason why I do not really emphasize on weighing out my grains, my flour, when it comes to milling it and making my typical bread recipe is because I'm working with 100% freshly milled wheat, which is a way different ball game than if you're used to working with store-bought flour. Now, I actually have my favorite farmer at the moment, 4 Generations Organic Farms. They are the wheat that I'm gonna be using today, and I'll be explaining why throughout this video. But one of the biggest reasons why is because their hard red, their Butler's Gold hard red, and their hard white wheat are just my go-to hard red and hard white wheats. I'm also using them because I just find that these particular wheats are the easiest for beginners. They are the most consistent. I will say their Butler's Gold hard red wheat is, I think by far, in my experience, the most consistent wheat that I've used when it comes to hard red. So especially if you're a beginner to freshly milled grains, I definitely highly recommend these particular grains. Now, in case you're wondering, they are organic farmers. They actually use regenerative farming practices, which I love, which means that they take care of their soil to make sure that the soil is as nutrient dense as possible, so your wheat berries are as nutrient dense as possible, so your bread is as nutrient dense as possible. Plus, they are shipped to my house, and I've noticed a lot of y'all have been complaining about shipping prices lately. These ship for free. So they come right to my house, which I love, and they're already sealed oxygen absorbers. So I highly recommend them. But there are other reasons I'm using them as well, especially for our science experiment that I'll be getting to later. Okay, so the number one reason that I do not really heavily emphasize weighing my grains, that is because with freshly milled wheat, like I said earlier, it is a different ball game, and this is how it's a different ball game, especially if you're used to buying store-bought flour. Say if I was to buy your nice King Arthur bread flour from the store. Well, that bread flour from King Arthur is going to be the exact same flour that I buy here in Florida that you can buy anywhere else, whether it's Texas, New York, Washington State, no matter where you're at, it's the same exact type of flour. And therefore, with it being that way, it's a bit easier to say, okay, use, for example, 600 grams of flour for a recipe, because no matter where you're at, that using that store-bought flour that has had the germ and the bran stripped and all of that, it's going to be more consistent with your bread baking. And in my experience, that's where I found a lot of people where they talk about, well, just weighing it, because I will admit it is more accurate. Now for me, I know how to measure a cup of flour, but someone else may pack it down a little bit or whatever that may be. So I can understand why bakers, especially on YouTube, those who are sharing these with a wider audience, will give you the weight measurements, because that's not going to change wherever you're at. So I do agree with that. The problem is whenever you switch over and you're using 100% fresh milled wheat, different ball game when it comes to how much flour is actually needed in your recipe. So for example, in my cookbook, in my simple yeast bread loaf recipe, I call for milling about 6 cups of wheat berries to give you about 9 to 9.5 cups of freshly milled wheat. If you notice, I don't give you an exact amount because it may vary. Now I am here in Florida. It is currently about 1,021 degrees outside and about 2,000% humidity. We are about 5 inches from the sun. It is super hot here. It is very humid here. And if it's a rainy day, oh my word, we're dying. So contrast to if I also was farther up north, say Michigan, Iowa, those really northern states here in the United States that get very cold. They don't have as much humidity. Baking, it's just gonna be different. So what this translates to is sometimes you may use 9 cups of flour. Sometimes you may use 10 cups of flour. Sometimes 9.5 cups of flour. You will notice that in my recipe, and what we will be doing in the science experiment is there's gonna come to a point where I just stop measuring how much flour I'm putting in my bread dough, and I'm now looking for signs that my bread dough has enough flour. So in essence, I'm teaching you, and this is such a huge part of my method, how to actually read bread dough, to actually see and learn the signs that you're looking for using 100% freshly milled wheat, which is so crucial. Bread baking is a science, but it's also a little bit of an art as well. Another factor to consider, and brings us back to 4 Generations Organic Farms, is that whenever you start milling your own wheat, you're gonna notice there is far more variety in the wheat berry family alone than you find in the store with store-bought flour. That store-bought flour, generally, if you'll flip it over and look on the back, most likely is a hard red wheat, and also it has been stripped of the bran and the germ and maybe bleached, and who knows what else has been done to it. It's enriched, but also occasionally you might find a soft white wheat, but most likely it's probably only hard red wheat, which is this one from 4 Generations Organic Farms. Fun fact, they are actually a supplier to King Arthur flour. So it's possible, if you have used King Arthur flour before, that you have used some of 4 Generations hard red wheat because it's in their flour. But contrast to now those of us who are milling, we have a variety. We have hard red wheat and we have hard white wheat. That's generally what I recommend for your typical yeast sandwich bread loaves. But even in that, there are varieties. 4 Generations, for example, actually grows 3 different types of hard red wheat. They have their Butler's Gold, which is my favorite one. They also have 2 other ones, Yakura wheat, and also Skydance. It just dawned on me that I've been pointing at the wrong buckets this entire time, but you get the idea. This one's Butler's Gold hard red. That one is the hard white wheat from 4 Generations. So even with the same farmer, they themselves grow different varieties of hard red wheat. And I actually did a video where I actually grabbed all of the different wheats that 4 Generations grows to actually show the difference that it makes in your bread baking. Some of them make better cinnamon rolls, for example. Some of them do the best with your typical sandwich bread. Some do better in the bread machine. So we have a huge variety now, and that also throws in a wrench to many people's plans when it comes to bread baking, because it's just yet another variable. So not only can you get different varieties of a wheat possibly from the same farmer, but we also have many different farmers to choose from. So depending on which farmer you get a wheat berry from, even though it may be hard red wheat, it may even be the exact Butler's Gold hard red wheat. But if I was to take this Butler's Gold hard red wheat and grow it here in Florida, it's gonna turn out a little bit different than how it does up there in Oklahoma on 4 Generations farms. And y'all, I haven't even touched to whenever you decide to combine these grains, and that really will throw things off as well, because you can combine hard red, say with spelt or kamut, or you can do hard red and hard white together. And each time you change that grain, it's gonna affect your bread dough. So now that I have hopefully very thoroughly communicated the complexity that we have now whenever we have switched over to 100% freshly milled grains, now let us switch over to our science experiment to actually show this difference. So if you're familiar with science experiments, bottom line is you have your controls, which are the parts that never change no matter how many times you experiment, and then you change one variable, one part. And that one variable for us is gonna be our wheats. So the first experiment that we're gonna do is I'm gonna be using the hard red, the Butler's Gold hard red wheat from 4 Generations Organic Farms. The second experiment, we're gonna switch it up to their hard white wheat. And how this is gonna work is I'm actually gonna weigh out the actual wheat berries. We're then gonna mill the wheat berries. I'm gonna go ahead and weigh that flour as well. And then we're gonna go to actually making my standard simple yeast bread loaf recipe and actually seeing how much flour I actually use when I'm reading the dough. And again, the results may actually surprise you. Okay, so experiment number 1, let's test out the Butler's Gold hard red wheat. I'm actually gonna measure out 6 cups of wheat berries to then see how much that is in actual grams. So let me move this over here. Remember to tare your scales, whichever one you were using. Okay, so 6 cups of hard red Butler's Gold wheat berries from 4 Generations Organic Farms equals to 1,257 grams. Let's go ahead and mill that up. All right, so we got this milled. Now, full disclosure, one thing I did not mention is I did fully clean out this hopper to make sure there was no extra flour or anything. So the only flour going in are from these wheat berries. Let's weigh our flour. Now this came out to 1247 grams. The flour actually came out less. Now that is probably, 10 grams isn't much. If you think about it, I remember 1 gram basically equaled a paper clip. So if you notice, like there's flour here, super duper fine flour is here, but we can just brush all that out here. Let's see if we're able to make up to the 10 grams. So, that's just how my mill works. We got up to 1249, close enough. But so 1257 grams, we're now down to 1,250 grams of flour from our wheat berries. And now I'm gonna just make this recipe. So again, this is just my simple yeast bread loaf recipe. I'm gonna do 2 cups of flour out of this bowl, 2 cups of flour. Go ahead and do an autolyse for that, and then go ahead and start making my dough, and I'll bring you back in to show you how I'm reading the dough and no longer paying attention to how much flour. And after my dough gets to where I know I need it to be, we're then gonna stick this back on the scale to see how much flour we did not use from the 1250 grams and compare it to the other wheat berries. Okay, so this is 3 3/4 cups warm water. It's also 2 1/4 tablespoon of instant yeast. And now I just measure out my 2 cups of flour. So how I always measure, to show you, is measuring cup, I just kind of dip down like that, and then I just shake it off. I know some people spoon it in. I don't do that. This works just fine for me, but again, it's all about reading the dough. So for now, 2 cups. Now we mix it together and I let this sit here for about 15 minutes and I'll see you back then. So one thing I want to mention while we are waiting for these 15 minutes to be up is 4 Generations Organic Farms is actually a sponsor here for this channel, Grains and Grit, which I'm so thankful for because they are awesome and I love them. And if you want to know more about them, I actually toured their farm in Oklahoma. It's my very first tour I've ever made of a wheat farm, which was great. So be sure to check out that video up here because it's really great and you'll get to know your farmers better. All right, 15 minutes are up. Now let's start making the rest of this dough. Let me try to do this where I can show you. So for those of you who are still concerned about how much flour to add, this is relevant to you whether you care about weighing anything or not. So now we add the rest of the ingredients, which for me is 3 1/4 tablespoons of salt, 1/2 cup of oil, 1/2 cup of honey. All right, and now our flour. For this recipe, the recipe calls for 9 to 9.5 cups of freshly milled flour. I've already added 2 cups. I want to add an additional 4 cups to get up to 6 cups of flour. And then I stop measuring and I'll show you why. Just kidding, I misspoke. I add an additional 6 cups of flour to actually get up to a total of 8 cups of flour. So I'm up to 6 now. I thought that didn't sound right. So, and now that we have 8 cups of flour total in, I now stop measuring and we start mixing and then start reading the dough. So in case you're curious, this is my Bosch Universal Mixer Plus. Love her, Miss Betsy, she's awesome. Link will be down below if you're wanting one yourself. Okay, and I do put her on the level 1 mixing for this. Okay, so now that she's mostly mixed together and flour's not gonna go poof everywhere, I put that in. I then just leave the guard on. And now I just start adding flour in about 1/4 cup of a time until I start seeing the dough just start to pull off the sides of the bowl. I will show you when that happens to know that I've added enough flour, and then I start my kneading time. All right. That right there is good. You can see that she's pulling off the sides of the bowl. I now don't add any more flour. And now I start my kneading time for 9 minutes. So while the bread dough is kneading, let's see how much flour we have left and how much we've actually used. So we had 1,150 grams of flour. This is how much we have left. So we're actually going to measure it and then see how much total flour we used in our hard red wheat dough. And then we're going to compare it with the other doughs. Okay, so same scale. Let's tare. Okay, so we have 45 grams left. So 1150 minus 45 means that we used 1,105 grams for my hard red wheat bread dough. So I just realized I made a boo-boo. I was not exactly accurate. I still had some hard red wheat flour in my measuring cup. So adding that to the bowl, we actually had 60 grams left over. So actually we used 1,090 grams of hard red wheat for our bread dough. Okay, so glad I got that cleared up. Okay, so 9 minutes are up. Our bread dough is done. So how I like to, again, this is part of reading that bread dough, is I like mine slightly tacky. So as you can see here, I'm pushing it down. Some of it's coming up. Some of it actually does stay on my hands, but this is how I want it. Slightly tacky, but it is nice and soft. This is perfect. And that leftover flour that I have, I just use it to dust my hands when it comes to shaping my bread dough. So one thing that I really want to point out is that when people are generally weighing their flour, say for example, you're using store-bought flour and it says use 600 grams of flour, you're dumping in all 600 grams. This 45 grams may not seem like a lot, and who cares? I mean, just measure out the wheat berries, mill it, dump it on in. But this 45 grams can actually make a difference between having perfect bread dough and your bread dough being a little too dense. So we have the perfect bread dough with our hard red. Now let's try our hard white. All right, now let's do hard white wheat. Again, 4 Generations Organic Farms hard white wheat is called Stardust if you're looking on the website. So now let's try this. And another genius thing, I realized I've been using a bowl that clearly my dog has been chewing up the handle. So That's really aesthetic, Felicia. Fun fact, looks like hard white weighs a little bit more because 6 cups of hard white wheat is 1,293 grams. So 1293. Let's mill this up to flour, see how much flour we have, make the bread dough, all the things. Okay, so we have all that milled. Let's see how much we have. It now weighs 1,284 grams. Now let's start mixing up this bread dough. Again, I use 2 cups for the autolyse. Then when that's done, 6 more cups. I stop measuring, go from there. We read the dough and we'll see how much flour in grams we actually use compared to our hard red wheat. And that is looking good. It's pulling off the sides of the bowl. Now let's start the kneading time for 9 minutes. So now the moment of truth to see how much of that hard white wheat flour we actually used. This time I remember to get all of the flour, even from the measuring cup. All right, so remaining, we only have 20 grams of hard white wheat flour left, but we started with 1284. So now the hard white wheat actually required 1,264 grams of flour as opposed to only 1,105 grams of the hard red wheat flour. Both of them, I milled 6 cups of the wheat berries, but you can see measuring wise of how much of a difference it actually used just between the 2 different wheat berries. Okay, so the 9 minutes are up, and once again, I have the perfect dough. It is nice and soft. It is stretchy. It is slightly tacky. So each time you change up wheats, your dough is gonna look a little bit differently. And this is ready to be shaped into my bread loaves for that delicious bread. Okay, so for those of you who are visual learners, like myself, let us recap with what we have learned from this experiment with actual captions. So hard red wheat versus hard white wheat, all from the same farm, 4 Generations Organic Farms. So 6 cups of hard red wheat is 1,257 grams versus 1,293 grams with hard white wheat. That's a difference of 36 grams. Hard white wheat actually weighs a little bit more. Now, when those 6 cups of wheat berries are milled into flour, it turns into 1,250 grams of hard red wheat flour and 1,284 grams of hard white wheat flour. Now, the amount of flour I actually needed for my bread dough was 1,090 grams of hard red wheat flour versus 1,265 grams of hard white wheat flour. I actually needed a little bit more hard white wheat flour than the hard red. That's a difference of 175 grams of flour. So the leftover flour from each batch that I milled is I had 60 grams left over with my hard red wheat and only 20 grams left over from my hard white wheat flour. So really the biggest takeaway from this, it's more important to read your bread dough than the scale. So there you go, y'all. That's the experiment. So this is why I say you can't just rely on weighing your grains, your flour, and think that just because I weighed it, my bread's gonna turn out perfectly. The point of this is to show you that each time you make bread, you know, we're not in a factory in our kitchens. It's gonna be a little bit different every single time. So even though you saw the amount of flour that I used today, that may change tomorrow. That may change a few months from now whenever we actually have a, you know, what we call winter here in Florida, and it actually gets colder. So each day it changes. That's why I tell you how important it is to actually read the dough. And I also showed that it all depends on the type of wheat berry that you used. The hard red and the hard white, they weigh differently, and they're from the same farm, grown in the same conditions, generally speaking. I mean, it's even from the same farm. And then I'm kind of curious now, if I was to choose two different hard reds, would they weigh the exact same, or would they also be different? Now, I'm not wanting to come across as bashing people who insist on using grams. Obviously, for those of y'all who are not in the United States, that's your system of measurement, is the metric system, and nothing wrong with that. But I'm just kind of more talking to the Americans here who have watched YouTube videos, and these bread bakers just insist that you have to use grams, you have to weigh it because it's the only way that your bread is going to turn out beautifully. It's the most consistent, and pretty sure I've kind of proven that as it's not true when it comes to 100% fresh and milled wheat. So the next time that you actually see someone talk about the importance of weighing everything, ask them, well, are you using fresh and milled wheat, or is it store-bought flour that is the same everywhere in the United States? So once again, thank you so much to 4 Generations Organic Farms for being a sponsor here with Grains and Grit. I love y'all. I love your wheat. Those of you who have not tried them yet, you're really missing out. Go to grainsandgrit.com/4generations and use this coupon code for 10% off your first order. Again, these are clean, wonderful, organic wheat berries from some excellent people. Their customer service is top of the line. You will not be disappointed if anything does go wrong with your shipment or anything. So thank you so much. And if you're wanting to actually see, now that we've proven the whole weight thing and how that varies from wheat berry to wheat berry, I actually did a video here where I tested out how different types of breads turn out when you switch up those wheat berries, and it's quite fascinating as well. And if you're just wanting to know how to actually make this simple yeast bread loaf recipe, then that's this video here. As always, I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week.